For 100 days, I simulated the craziest ecosystem I've ever seen. To celebrate the release of the final season of Jurassic World Chaos Theory, I unleashed some of the biggest and most iconic creatures to ever walk the Earth onto the streets of Malta. This is Jurassic World like never seen before, not as a theme park, but as a living, breathing ecosystem where chaos is around every corner. The question remains, can life find a way to coexist, or are they all doomed to die? Well, to find out, we'll have to go back to day one. First, it was time to set up the key locations of this ecosystem. Houses and city infrastructure were placed, and landscape was forged to include cliffs, flowing waterfalls, and vibrant plant life for the herbivorous dinosaurs that would live here. There were three main biomes here and locations: the Big Valley, the city, and the Colosseum. Each area is distinct and will provide various food sources to dinosaurs that set up their homes in this ecosystem. But now we go back to where it all began. The ecosystem kicked off with the illegally transported Atrociraptors, escaped from the catacombs of Malta, and found their way onto the streets of the city itself. On the morning of day one, the Maltese citizens found their city no longer belonged to them. The Atrociraptors had begun their hunt. Despite the pedestrians trying their best to calm the raptors in this classic Owen Grady pose, the Atrociraptors answered to no master and began to brutally slaughter the human population. These mass killings became a citywide emergency, and the government wasted no time in actioning an evacuation procedure. All surviving residents of the city were relocated to somewhere safe. But I had now concluded that this once quaint, quiet, peaceful city was beyond saving, and so it became the centerpiece of our ecosystem over the next 100 days. The Atrociraptors, Red, Ghost, Tiger, and Panthea, were left to live in the city they had now conquered. It would be here where they formed their territory and felt the safest. The first new species added to the Big Valley were the Ornithomimus. These bird mimics lived in the late Cretaceous North America and were feathered ostrich-like dinosaurs with toothless beaks. They were built for speed and agility with their long legs and an evolutionary mechanism that would become very necessary if they were to survive in these lands. One of the ostriches was given the name of Brave One, as it got very close to the borders of the Atrociraptor city shortly after arriving. These Ornithomimuses, though, were not content with stagnation, nor the prospect of re-extinction, and they immediately got busy by building a nest and populating it with eggs. And it wasn't long before the first naturally bred life emerged into the ecosystem. These babies won the ecosystem lottery, hatching straight next to their parents, and being born at a time and place where carnivores were not running amok. The ostriches, though, weren't the only species in the Big Valley, as a pair of ankylosaurs were added, led of course by Bumpy. These two were sure to deter any predators from entering their territory. The Ornithomimuses were not the only species in Malta that wanted to add to their numbers. Deep in the city centre, right in the back of someone's back garden, emerged a trio of Atrociraptor babies, each with differing priorities while they waited for their parents to arrive. One immediately got distracted by its tail, another wanted to run into the bushes, while the third wanted to rest on the nice warm tarmac of the once busy roads of Malta. The road lover was named Eagle. A meat feeder was added to the Atrociraptor's garden, as the babies seemingly couldn't rely on their parents to bring food back for them. One of the Ornithomimuses lost itself while it was exploring the city. It was spotted by Panthea, who followed it through the narrow Maltese streets, but the Ornithomimus was one lucky duck, as Panthea discovered the meat feeder instead and opted for a much easier, featherless food source. The Ornithomimus was duly named Lucky as a result of its near miss of death, which I don't even think it noticed. Overall, following the human massacre, it had been a peaceful start to the ecosystem. Both the Atrociraptors and Ornithomimuses had been sticking with their young and pleasantly exploring the new areas of their territory at their own leisurely pace. But we all know that calmness in these lands will not last forever. On the evening of day 6, a mysterious shipment was arriving in Malta. The helicopter set the container down on the edge of the city and emerged a larger, angrier, hungrier beast than this ecosystem has seen thus far. A sole Allosaurus that had been blinded in one eye emerged. This late Jurassic predator was powerfully built with sharp teeth and long claws, and in this Malta ecosystem, it will likely hunt everything that moves. The Allosaurus represents the first of 5 apex predators that will roam Malta. Each will be more cunning and dangerous than the last. This Allosaur was given the name of Terror, and immediately stalked the Big Valley, looking for its first victim. As a result of Terror's presence, the ankylosaurs saw fit to relocate from the plains of the Big Valley over to the lakes. Not only will they be grateful for the giant patches of water they can drink and bask beside, but the open space will allow them to see any threats from far away. Back in the city and at the garden nest, 3 more Atrociraptor babies stepped out into a larger world for the first time, taking the Atrociraptor count up to 10 now, should all these babies survive to adulthood. While I watched one of the babies play with its tail, I can't help but worry that their numbers will soon spiral out of control and cause imbalance throughout the entire ecosystem, meaning almost guaranteed doom for the smaller species such as the Ornithomimuses. Though not all was happy in the Atrociraptor pack. Panthea had been doing most of the work when it came to raising the young whippersnappers, and she felt she deserved more recognition for it. She challenged Tiger for the leadership position of the pack, and after a short brawl, she came out on top, and was thus crowned as the new Atrociraptor leader. The fight was illegally viewed by the Ornithomimuses, who always seemed to be closer to danger than perhaps they realised. Terra the Allosaur, though, entered the city the following night. It watched the Atrociraptors wander through the streets from a distance, but did not engage, believing that they wouldn't be worth his time. At this stage, I realised that some competition may be needed soon, something with a little bit more fire in its belly. In the morning, a fight had broken out in the city. The Ankylosaurus, who wasn't Bumpy, had gotten lost in the night and wandered too close to the Atrociraptor nest for the raptor's liking. The Atrociraptors pounced, desperately trying to pierce the Ank's thick and bony armour, but to no avail, as the Ankylosaur managed to keep chucking them off over and over again. The raptors got close to taking it down, but didn't take advantage when they managed to flip it over, and eventually the Ankylosaur meandered away, and the raptors didn't press the attack button again. Instead, they changed their target to a chicken who got too close to the city. Ghost chased the giant bird all the way to the big valley, but eventually caught up and took down its prey. The rest of the flock scarpered, while Ghost dug into a big, feathery meal. On day 15, there was finally life in the Colosseum. The second apex of the ecosystem was introduced, the Tyrannosaurus rex. These were sisters, Big E.T. and Little E.T. The Tyrannosaurus rex needs no introduction, as they are the most iconic dinosaur species to ever live. The Colosseum is now theirs, and I very much doubt they will be willingly giving it up. Eagle, the once tiny Atrociraptor who enjoyed basking on the tarmac and rolling around in the grass, was now fully grown up, ready to contribute to the pack as a whole and make its mark on the ecosystem. Despite the Atrociraptors aging, there would be no shortage of babies in the ecosystem, as Bumpy the Ankylosaurus laid 2 eggs in a nest that she had forged near the lakes. A dust storm was now falling on Malta as we hit day 20. The Ornithomimus parent was trying its best to control its scared children, while the Atrociraptors in the city were suffering some minor surface injuries from the storm. The raptors became so agitated that one attempted to challenge Terra to a duel. Luckily for the smaller beast, Terra didn't fancy it in these conditions. The Rexes, though, didn't seem to mind at all, sleeping through the storm and taking nice walks through their lake. At the opposite end of the scale, though, the Atrociraptor babies were terrified out of their minds and getting hurt from the storm. Poor little guys. After the storm subsided, I watched Bumpy and her mate peacefully waddling through the lakes, dipping their heads in to nibble at some of the underwater plant life. But there was soon to be competition for their territory, as a trio of baryonyxes, Limbo, Chaos and Grim, entered the area. This lake district was the perfect environment for the British piscivores to live and begin their own journeys in this ecosystem, and they took over the lakes, not even caring at the fact that the Ankylosaurs were soon to be parents. The Barrys are dangerous, but they are nothing compared to what is still to come in this 100-day journey. The Atrociraptors in the city got a rather large uninvited guest near their nests. Little E.T. had wandered all the way from the Colosseum to scout the surrounding areas when she came across the raptor family. Little E.T. immediately began terrorising the much smaller raptors, roaring and running through the garden, and even trampling on a couple of the defenceless babies. The raptors left their garden feeder, and with their population spiralling out of control, Little E.T. took it upon herself to become an effective birth control of sorts. After terrorising and traumatising the juvenile Atrociraptors for life just for a laugh, Little E.T. then moved over to the lake, where she gulped down some fresh water from the falls and roared her dominance over the area, a horrifying sound for the Ornithomimuses in the background. Fortunately for them, though, the baryonyxes were not present at the lake when Little E.T. arrived. Instead, they visited and explored the outskirts of the city. Beside the canyons, there was a dinosaur meetup as Grim met Ghost, along with a trio of Ornithomimuses. It was less of a Mexican standoff as it was a chicken massacre, with both the baryonyx and Atrociraptor successfully getting their kills. While the two victors snacked on their feathery feasts, another Ornithomimus was chased and hunted down by Panthea. Overall, it was a very bad day to have had feathers. But it was little E.T. who claimed the accolades from Pantheria's hard work, as she casually walked in and stole the kill, eating the Unformimer's corpse like a true scavenger. When she had finished eating, she returned to the Colosseum, where her older sister was still napping. Little E.T. showed that the Atrociraptor population could be controlled, but since she didn't fancy being away from the Colosseum for too long, it was time to introduce another species to the city that would remain and keep the Atrociraptors in check: the Pyroraptors. These feathered firehounds were airlifted in not too far from the city in the night, and it won't be long before they meet the Atrociraptors in the city. After all, the city isn't large enough for the two of them. After some infighting under the lamplight, it was the creamy-coloured raptor, John, who was declared as the leader of the Pyroraptor pack. Despite her successful adventures, little E.T. was not given the hero's welcome from her older sister as she thought she would be, following her scouting mission. Big E.T. had been worried beyond her sister's absence and demanded answers. After some sibling infighting, little E.T. ran off with her tail between her legs. Back in the city on day 25, things took a terrible turn for the Baryonyxes. Grim was attacked by 3 Atrociraptors, and despite managing to shake the first wave off, including brutally sending a raptor into a palm tree, the raptors were persistent and kept clawing and biting, even knocking the Piscivore over. But Grim was not one to give up, and got back up, managing to take the opportunity to flee back to the lakes. But Chaos was not so lucky. Chaos accidentally stumbled into Terror, and that one stroke of bad fortune cost it its life, as Terror easily dispatched the smaller Baryonyx. Rest in peace, Chaos. But only a few moments later, and still reeling from their failed Baryonyx attack, the same Atrociraptors got ambushed by the Pyroraptors, and 2 different duels commenced. Both fights went identically, as the Atrociraptors pounced first before the Pyroraptors retaliated. They both struck at the same time, resulting in nothing more than a body slam. But in the end, with both battles, the Atrociraptors stood their ground, while the Pyroraptors retreated. It appeared on this occasion that Scales had beaten Feathers. Over at the lakes, Grim and Limbo were mourning the loss of their good friend Chaos, and could only swim solemnly in its memory. Grim was also taking its time to fish in the populated lake, as it would need all the nutrition it could get to heal from the wounds the Atrociraptors imposed. But the Atrociraptors themselves are not unharmed from the Pyroraptor attack, with this one here resting on the pavement, trying to recover from a broken claw. For its sake, let's hope that it doesn't become ingrown. But the Pyroraptors were not done yet, as their objective was to wipe out the Atrociraptor population. A female one initiated another fight with an Atrociraptor and managed to land a couple of good bites in. Eventually, a third one was enough to knock the North American raptor over and fatally bite it in the neck. She had some cuts on her face, but she had done her duty. A second fight was taking place at the same time, but this time the Pyroraptor could not take down its target. But still, just because the Atrociraptors got new competition in the Pyroraptors and the Baryonyxes for the city, it did not mean that the Ornithomimises were safe, as that one unlucky individual soon found out. Once at the bottom of the food chain, always at the bottom of the food chain. With the Ankylosaurs, Baryonyxes, and now the Raptors taking a fancy to it, the lakes was quickly becoming a fan favourite area for the ecosystem's inhabitants. And it was no surprise really, due to the vast clean water source and large open area for basking, this lake really is an oasis of Malta. At the outskirts of the lake, an Atrociraptor had vengeance on its mind for its fallen foe. With nothing but rage on its mind, it managed to lethally take down the feathered Dromaeosaur with a simple neck bite. And back at the lake, a Pyroraptor stopped its drinking with haste as it had spotted the next target. An infant Atrociraptor was wandering near the lake, and it attacked, wounding the baby right in front of its parent, who was drinking ignorantly at the lake. The two raptor species were now in an all-out war against each other. Will the Pyroraptors win, or will it end as the same way as the Chaos Theory Netflix series? New life had emerged during the chaos and around the lakes, as the Ankylosaur twins hatched from their nests. Unfortunately, the baby tanks were thrown straight into the deep end, with the Atrociraptors and Pyroraptors around. One of the babies was named Smoothie, and while it was still walking around despite some cuts from the raptor attack, the same could not be said for its sibling, who had been hunted down by Tiger shortly after birth. In an act of cunning bravery or brazen stupidity, Grim wanted revenge for Chaos and squared up to Terror. The fight immediately, though, went against Grim, with the Allosaur landing 2 brutal bites on the Piscivore's smaller frame. Despite landing a bite back on the Jurassic carnivore, a truce was called, and the two combatants laid down to rest. Unfortunately, though, this left Grim injured and on low health, and a short while later, the Pyroraptors turned up, attacking Grim right in front of Limbo, who was helpless, as the feathered raptors had no problems in taking the Baryonyx down. This now meant that Limbo was the last surviving baryonyx, and its species' survival chances were looking, well, grim. The Pyroraptors celebrated their success in the only way they know how to, by building a nest and laying 2 eggs. At first they were brought in to tackle the Atrociraptor problem, but since then they have taken issue with pretty much every species in Malta, so additional numbers will help their cause. Little E.T., who had been banished from the Colosseum and had been reduced to scavenging now, caught the scent of Grimm's body from the other side of the city. Desperate for food, she traversed all that way, taking every opportunity she could to scare the smaller raptors, and eventually arrived at the carcass. She began to eat right in front of the Pyroraptors, once more claiming a kill that wasn't hers. To encourage the Rexes to return to stay in the Colosseum, more challenging prey was added in that area. A herd of Nasutoceratops. And to keep them in the Colosseum, more plant life and their favourite foods were added nearby. Upon hearing the news of the arrivals in the Colosseum, will Little E.T. return, or will she stay to scavenge off the raptors? We can only wait to find out. The Pyroraptors had mainly been introduced to control and reduce the Atrociraptor population, and by all accounts, they were failing that objective, as Atrociraptor triplets emerged from a back garden nest. The Pyroraptors themselves had also just become parents when 2 of their own emerged from their own nest. Completely oblivious, of course, to Little E.T. behind it, the young duckling was immediately fascinated by its tail and began terrorising its sibling, before finally obediently following its parent. This little rapscallion was named the name Feather, and the first thing it was ordered to do was watch from afar while its father hunted down Ornithomimus. Despite the arrival of the Nasutoceratops to entice Little E.T. to return to the Colosseum, she instead was perfectly happy living by the lakes, where water and easy food sources were plentiful. A wise man once said that T-Rexes don't want to be fed.
He wants to hunt.
Apparently that doesn't apply to Little E.T. Back with the Atrociraptors, things were continuing to spiral out of control, as 3 more Atrociraptor babies were born. Their population must be in the hundreds now, surely. Over in the Big Valley, the newborn Pyroraptors were running and playing through the fields under the careful supervision of their father. But in Malta, danger was always nearby, as Little E.T. picked up the scent of an Ornithomimus corpse. In an unexpected turn, the Nasutoceratops in the Colosseum were loving life. Since Big E.T. was paying them no attention, the Ceratopsids decided to make most of their living arrangement and boost the long-term survival of their species by welcoming 2 new babies into their herds. The Atrociraptor population was now truly spiralling out of control, however. Whether it be the city, or the Big Valley, or the lakes where Limbo is trying to live a peaceful life, there are Atrociraptors everywhere. The Pyroraptors have failed, so you can never trust a feathered dinosaur to get anything done, it appears. A storm hit Malta on day 35, causing an imbalance for everything in the ecosystem. The small herbivores were panicking, while the raptors were particularly riled up. Tragically, Brave One was hunted down and killed by Tiger. Rest in peace, Brave One, you fearless chicken. Can we all pay our respects to Brave One in the comments below? While Little E.T. prowled in the background, yet another raptor fight was taking place between the Pyros and the Atrocies. This fight was short and went the way of the Atrociraptor. The Pyroraptor that was killed was the last surviving female, meaning the Pyroraptor population could no longer regenerate naturally, giving the Atrociraptors a huge advantage in their turf war. Once the storm had subsided, the 3rd apex predator entered the scene in Malta, Toro the Carnotaurus. Built for speed and agility, this horned beast is sure to run rings around anyone that he targets. In some devastating news, Smoothie the Ankylosaurus was found dead on the shore of the lake. Tiger the Atrociraptor has now fully embraced its evil supervillain persona. After killing Brave One not long ago during the storm, it then set its sights on the poor, defenseless baby Ankylosaurus. But Tiger wasn't done there though. Feather the baby Pyroraptor was minding its own business when Tiger charged in and knocked the infant over. Fortunately, Feather got up again, but Tiger is an absolute menace who clearly needs to be dealt with. The adult Ankylosaurs could only mourn the loss of his last living child, but still tried to carry on as normal, not helped by the fact that Feather was eating his deceased young. There was a little encounter between the apex predators as Little E.T. had spotted Toro and began to tail him. The Carnotaur eventually turned around and squared up to the much larger Tyrannosaur, but no fight came of it, yet at least. Later that day, Feather the young Pyroraptor was found dead in the Big Valley. You have no prizes for guessing who the culprit was. Tiger the Atrociraptor had gained itself yet another victim, and another juvenile victim at that. No sooner had the 3rd apex predator been introduced than the 4th was now introduced to Malta. Nokia the Spinosaurus. One of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs ever discovered, Nokia started off her life in the Colosseum by peacefully sleeping at the base of the waterfalls. How cute. Toro the Carnotaurus had gotten his first kill of the ecosystem, and admittedly it wasn't a hard one, as it was only an Ornithomimus. But still, they do all have to start somewhere, but he better be careful or else his body and food will be stolen by Little E.T. The Nasutoceratops were still living the best life of any dinosaur species in Malta though. They weren't fussed at all by Big E.T., and they are showing equally as little care for Nokia, as 4 new additions to their family hatched out of eggs and were immediately greeted by their parents. Ever since the banishing of her sister from the Colosseum all those days ago, Big E.T. had felt as though something was missing in her life. Pained by loneliness, she hadn't shown any form of interest towards the Nasutoceratops or eating in general, and she was now starving to death. Showing little signs of getting up and doing something about this, the question is this the end for the older Tyrannosaur sibling? Nokia, for its part, wasn't showing any interest in the Nasutoceratops either, but it didn't need to, as its primary food source was the fish that could be found in the Colosseum waterfalls or nearby at the lakes. But at the other end of the Colosseum, Big E.T. had finally woken up and decided that violence was now necessary, and squared up to the Nasutoceratops matriarch, who had been guarding several of her young calves. What happens next? Find out after a brief intermission. Toro and Terra encountered each other in the Big Valley, but neither challenged the other to a fight, and they went their own separate ways. Now, back at the Colosseum, action lovers will be disappointed to find out that equally as little happened between Big E.T. and the Nasutoceratops. However, Big E.T. did find the motivation to stay to hunger and feast on the feeder, so she will live to fight for another day. Big E.T.'s roar was heard all across Malta, inspiring confidence or fear into all animals of these lands. Limbo and Toro did briefly stare down at each other, but fortunately for the Baryonyx, this Carnotaurus wasn't in the mood today for a brawl. But Limbo's luck did not last long, as it ran into Terra, who certainly did want to scrap. Things were not looking good for Limbo, as Terra was much larger and had contributed to the deaths of Chaos and Grim. And it wasn't long before Limbo fell after a devastating bite from the Allosaurus. This meant that the Baryonyxes were once again extinct. The Pyroraptors now had nothing left, and therefore nothing to lose, as this creamy individual went to face down Ghost. Unfortunately, it didn't come up with a battle plan before initiating the fight, and Ghost easily wiped it out with a devastating neck bite. As we approached day 50 in our ecosystem, the first non-terrestrial animal arrived, the behemoth Quetzalcoatlus. With a long neck and toothed beak, still light legs and a wingspan of up to 11 meters, this creature was a powerful glider and more than capable of hunting on land. The Atrociraptors in their billions at this point were feeling pretty unstoppable. Led by Tiger, of course, 3 raptors pounced on the Rex and started biting and clawing through her flesh. Disappointingly, Little E.T. did not put up much of a fight at all, and the underdog raptors managed to take her down, earning themselves a hefty meal and safe in the knowledge that it won't be stolen by said Rex. Despite Tiger's elderly age, its bloodlust was still ever present. Bumpy and her mates were of course devastated by the loss of Smoothie and their other child, but they weren't giving up their dreams of having a family. They claimed another nest, and Bumpy laid 2 more eggs into it. Not long after, the 2 babies broke out of the eggs and into the larger ecosystem. Hopefully this time, they will live much longer. The Quetz, who had been given the name Hotwing, was staying away from all the drama of the land dwellers and was simply living her life, peacefully resting in the Colosseum, even undeterred by Big E.T., who was sleeping beside her. I'm sure many species in Malta envied such a life. And one of those species is the Pyroraptors. The last adult Pyroraptor had gotten itself into a duel with the Atrociraptor. Given the name Last Hope, it managed to strike first on the North American raptor. After a body slam where both raptors took damage, Last Hope decided to flee, its species grateful that they get to live on for another day. A second flying species was introduced into the ecosystem, this time the Pteranodon. Though not as menacing as Hotwing, they could still be dangerous in their own way. Once they stopped fighting with each other in the air, they had their own objective to complete. Do what the Pyroraptors failed to do, and take out the Atrociraptors, even take out the babies if they had to. The new arrivals were not done there though, as a pair of Suchomimuses made their way into Malta. Originating in Niger, Africa, these Spinosaurids were predominantly fish eaters, and while they were accustomed to African rivers, they would now have to adapt to the Mediterranean lakes. Toro the Carnotaurus, who had lived a rather uneventful life at this point, was meandering through the city. What began as a standard easygoing walk took a turn when he stumbled upon a pair of baby Atrociraptors. Toro began to terrorise the infant raptors and knocked one of them over. After all the amusement of his child bullying, Toro then took a well-deserved rest, watching the Pteranodons fly overhead. Lucky the Ornithomimus, who had managed to escape death earlier on in the ecosystem, continued to prove more why it was deserving of such a name. Lucky managed to avoid a fatal strike with a rather impressive use of speed and agility. But as the next day dawned, the most tragic scene of this entire ecosystem lay upon us. Bumpy, the Ankylosaurus, was dead, hunted down by the Atrociraptors, leaving just her partner and the 2 babies to continue the Ankylosaurus bloodline. That night, there was a face-off between 2 of the apex predators, Toro and Terra. But underwhelmingly, just like the last time they encountered, nothing came of it. Terra walked away, while Toro held his ground. Also during the night, the Pteranodons began their quest to hunt down the Atrociraptors. The Pteranodon spotted a raptor eating from the garden feeders when it swooped down for an attack. At first, it looked like it had got the kill, but when the raptor got up, it seemed that the Pteranodons had just been as successful as the Pyroraptors, that being not at all. But overall, this night was devastating as 3 Atrociraptors attacked Bumpy's mate. Their attack was coordinated and efficient, and sadly it wasn't long before the Ankylosaurus fell. To go along with that tragedy, the baby Ankylosaurus was also being killed and eaten. All that was remaining was 1 Ankylosaurus juvenile, and I don't rate his odds very highly. To help with the carnivore onslaught that was occurring, more armoured herbivores were added. A herd of stegosaurs were the first creature. The sheer size of this creature, along with their armour-plated phagomizers, meant that these guys could easily take on any carnivore that this ecosystem had to throw at them. The Suchomimuses were already causing chaos in the Big Valley. After killing a baby Atrociraptor, which already makes it a hero, the Sucho soon changed its target, Toro the Carnotaurus. After performing a blood-curdling scream at the Argentine predator, the Suchomimus then performed a physically and scientifically impossible kill by genetically taking down the Carnotaurus. What an absolute wizard. The Suchomimus was named Dagger, while Toro, quite literally, had never seen what hit him. Despite all the chaos and heartbreak in the Big Valley, the new stegosaurs were fitting in just fine. In fact, they were fitting in so fine that to the point that they had built their own nest and laid 3 eggs. Malta can only hope that these guys will be the answer to the Atrociraptor problem. In the Colosseum, Big E.T. and Nokia met for the first time. In classic British fashion, they greeted each other loudly before then taking a drink and crashing out. Overall, the Colosseum was becoming an oasis for the species that lived there. Well, almost every species, as this Pteranodon was taken down by Last Hope. Overall, the Pteranodons have lost every battle they've fought in, and it's been a very poor performance for them so far in the ecosystem. Following its takedown of Toro, Dagger was feeling confident enough to take on one of the stegosaurs. It started off strongly before tanking a brutal Phagomizer swipe. After a body slam, the fight was going evenly, but the Stegosaurus didn't feel that way, and it fled, with the Sucho roaring in success. But the Stegosaurus was not done fighting overall, as this individual took on Terra, the Baryonyx Slayer. This was an even fight between these classic Jurassic foes. All this violence and destruction was too much for the baby Stegosaurs, who began to panic and cower behind their mother, who made sure to put herself between all the action and her children. The Stegosaurs don't find themselves in yet another fight. This one was a crucial battle against the Atrociraptors. The Raptors' hard work, though, paid off, as the Stegosaur toppled over, and Ghost continued to sink its teeth into the herbivore's thigh, securing the kill. The Raptors had managed to take down the great protector of the Big Valley, and the question was, will anything manage to take them down at this point? Lucky the Ornithomimus was still evading attacks from the Atrociraptors, and it now seems at this point that it was less lucky and just more intelligent. Calculating the exact movements that it needs to make, making the dominant carnivores of Malta seem like an amateur. 3 more juvenile stegosaurs, though, emerged from a nest into the Big Valley. It was great that they did, as 2 of the previous batch had already been hunted down and killed by the Atrociraptors. The Atrociraptors were not satisfied with hunting children, though, as they had once more set their sights on an adult who was drinking at the lake, patiently waiting for an opening. The baby stegosaurs were now racing across the Big Valley, desperately trying to get to their parents, as they know how vulnerable they are when alone. Unfortunately, though, when its parent moved away from the nearby Atrociraptor, the baby wasn't fast enough and was left behind. The raptor took the opportunity and attacked. The stegosaur managed to survive the first ambush, but wasn't strong enough to survive the second attack. Another heartless murder by the Atrociraptors, where the culprit was given the name Bully. At least this mother and baby stegosaur, though, were much happier, with the baby morphing through the mother while she rested. Life, finds a way. A Pteranodon was circling the skies, and it had spotted an Atrociraptor below that it quite fancied the look of. When it swooped down for the attack, it looked as though it had managed to pick the raptor up, but the raptor had other ideas. It was yet another failed attack from the Pteranodons, and another win for the raptors. Yet another baby stegosaur had joined the resting mother, and they were now forming a queue behind her, waiting for her to do something. Past day 50 now, a storm was blowing down Malta. and the Pteranodon's time in the ecosystem was going from bad to worse, as Hotwing decided that she didn't fancy sharing the skies with any other creature. While Hotwing landed for a drink in the distance, Big E.T. had also decided that she had had enough of sharing the territory with the Nasutoceratops and challenged one of them to a duel. It turned out to be a one-sided battle, as Big E.T. landed 2 unopposed bites. But ultimately, it was Big E.T. who fled the affair. It turns out that she had suffered a nasty gash when attacking and had been pierced by the horns. She was now low on health, agitated by the storm, and could do with nothing more than to sleep off her wounds. After the storm ended, another Pteranodon was flying over the lakes when it spotted an Atrociraptor by the shoreline. Unfortunately, the raptor spotted it at the last moment and managed to catch it mid-air, dragging it under the water and killing it. Mark that down as yet another Pteranodon failure. Carnage was now happening all across Malta. Dagger took on a Stegosaurus, and despite not getting the kill, did end up mostly unscathed, while the Stegosaur fled for safety. Elsewhere, Last Hope took on the Atrociraptor in the Colosseum, fighting for pride. And to its credit, it did manage to take down the vermin raptor species. Last Hope celebrated with a nice relaxing swim in the Colosseum's lake. But some sad news now, as Lucky's good fortune had finally run out. And the Atrociraptor cornered it against a cliff face and finally ended this absolute legend. Rest in peace, Lucky. Einstein once described insanity as repeating the same task over and over and expecting different results. So this Pteranodon was clearly just insane, as it attempted to take on a raptor. And just like all the previous attempts, the raptor scooped the flyer out of the air and killed it with a bite to the neck. A trio of those menacing Atrociraptors attempted to take down another Stegosaurus. At first, the Stegosaurus threw the vermin off, but the raptors didn't give up easily, and perhaps they should have. 3 more attacked in the next wave, but the Stegosaurs managed to throw them off once more, and this time with so much power that it killed the lot of them. The Stegosaur ran off in a panicked haze, perhaps not aware that the danger was over for now. Terra and the unnamed Suchomimus fought over the body of a baby Stegosaurus. Terra was upset that Dagger, the other Suchomimus, had killed its good friend Toro, and took its anger out on the Suchomimus, grabbing the Piscivore by the neck, twisting and then performing one last lethal takedown. No more than what the Suchomimuses deserved. Last Hope was still trying to complete the mission of ending the Atrociraptor line, but this time his luck ran out, and the scaled raptor managed to pounce and take down the feathered beast. Last Hope exceeded expectations and lasted much longer than the rest of its species. Alas though, the Pyroraptors were now once more extinct. Terra wasn't just happy with one Suchomimus though, and he wanted to complete the set. It challenged Dagger not far off from where he fought the other, and after a lengthy battle where the two embraced a couple of times, it was Dagger who slowly limped off with a minor fracture. Terra roared in success, but it too was also suffering from the same minor fracture. On day 65, the final and largest of the apex predators arrived in Malta, a pair of Giganotosauruses. These South American Goliaths could reach up to 13 meters in length and often hunted large sauropods, though there were none of these in Malta yet. These two were named Tyson and Rory and began their lives in the ecosystem by wandering through the long-abandoned urban city. Terra the Allosaurus was not impressed with these newcomers and was not willing to surrender its territory without a fight. Terra had 4 disadvantages, however, compared to the Gigas. There was only one of it was much smaller than the Gigas, it was much older than the spry young Gigas, and lastly, it was still wounded from the fight with Dagger. As expected, the fight did not go its way, as the Giganotosaurus easily dispatched Terra using a fancy dodging maneuver before biting at Terra's neck. Terra was a true legend of this ecosystem, and it is heartbreaking to see it fall after just one fight too many. The Giganotosauruses, however, were setting themselves up to be the new villains of Malta. The Nasutoceratops had left their long-time home at the Colosseum to graze and meander in the Big Valley. This whole herd, from mothers to fathers to babies, were having the time of their life in the sunny grassland. They had been allowed to leave as the Colosseum's self-appointed chief officer, Nokia, was sleeping on the job. The only job Nokia would be good at was procrastinating. There was nothing but action in the city, however, whether that be 2 Atrociraptors having a go at each other for dominance, or this brave little Atrociraptor believing it could take on a Stegosaur on its own. It was a gallant effort from the one-man army, who even managed to knock the Stegosaur over. Once the herbivore got back up, the raptor tried again and again, but the Stegosaur just kept pushing it away. Eventually the raptor ran off in search of an easier food source. It was a very brave attempt from the raptor, and the surviving Stegosaur, who was left with 69% health, was named Scale. Deeper within the Maltese city, 3 more Atrociraptors were born, breaking out of their eggs and wandering into their garden. They are cute now, playing with their tails and such, but we all know what these menaces will turn into. New life was added to the Big Valley to spruce up the population a little bit. And this time, it was big life forms. These giant behemoths were Patagotitans, who lived in the late Cretaceous Argentina and could go up to 30 meters in length. Back in the Colosseum, Big E.T. had fully recovered from her last fight with the Nasutoceratops, and this time she got her revenge, taking down one of the bulls to feast on. Checking in on the Giganotosaurus, Tyson was still by the lake, taking on a babysitting job for the Atrociraptors, while Rory had travelled all the way over to the Colosseum, where it was being screamed at by Big E.T. while it stood over the Nasutoceratops corpse. Nokia had been rudely awakened from its slumber by Big E.T. and was demanding answers. Big E.T. decided to walk away and framed Rory for the crime. The Nasutoceratops matriarch was taking up a defensive position, very aware that the threat that Big E.T. posed to her young. But Big E.T. for now was just not interested and just continued to walk on by. The matriarch's job had just become busier as well, as 3 new Nasutoceratops calves broke out of the nest and began galloping across the shoreline of the Colosseum's lake. Blissfully unaware of all the dangers around them, they would have to be careful, and perhaps very careful. While their parents were busy chewing on each other's horns, Rory was stalking in the background. And Rory wasn't being particularly quiet either. The Nasutoceratops paid for their inattention when one of their young was hunted down by Rory, who didn't even eat their little snack. Apparently, he was killing for sport. Later that day, another storm fell down over Malta, and these events never failed to agitate every single dinosaur within the ecosystem. But the Patagotitans couldn't complain about how it was going, as they introduced a new child of their own, and no doubt it will turn into a big beefy sauropod one day. But the storm quickly turned into a horror story for the Nasutoceratops. One of the members was hunted down by an Atrociraptor, while another was killed by a Giga in the Colosseum. Thankfully for them, the storm didn't last long. When the storm subsided, the new baby Patagotitan could now experience the mostly pristine weather of Malta for the first time. Unobstructed by the difficulties that the storm provided, the baby could now live its childish life to the full. The baby was given the name Patrick, and obediently remained by the side of his parents, Judy and Jory. While little E.T. may be gone, her scavenging legacy lives on through Big E.T., who stole the Nasutoceratops corpse right in front of the victorious Atrociraptor, who was clearly fuming at this. It wasn't a particularly happy time for the Atrociraptors either, as one of the OGs and first leader of the pack, Ghost, was found dead in the city, having starved to death. This was a big blow for the Atrociraptors, and the rest of the pack spent some time mourning the loss of a true legend. Rest in peace, Ghost. In the Colosseum, Big E.T. and Rory encountered each other once more, but while Big E.T. roared, Rory continued to walk on by, not wanting any trouble. And that was because Rory was soon to be a parent. A nest with 2 Giganotosaurus eggs had been found nearby. They would do well, however, to keep the nest safe, with Big E.T. and Nokia lurking in nearby territory. The Nasutoceratops were now taking large hits to their numbers, with all the large carnivores nearby now, but they were still not giving up, as eggs were still being laid and new baby cattle were still emerging from their nests. This constant recycling of the population will be vital for their survival, and also vital for the survival of the carnivores. The Colosseum was at this point teeming with babies, as the Giga twins were born, their parents waiting to greet them so they can be well protected from all the threats and scavengers that lurk nearby. Nokia was continuing to sleep and showing little energy or enthusiasm to react to whatever was happening around her. Figuring she was lonely, a second Spinosaurus was introduced to the Colosseum, who would become her mate. This red-hot Spino was named Jalapeno and was immediately showing signs of life and interest in his surroundings. Tyson and Rory were proving to be excellent parents, playing with their children and keeping them safe, despite the baby's insistence of getting a bit too close to Hot Wing. One thing the child will not have, however, is playmates, as the Gigas made sure that the newborn Nasutoceratops in the area were eliminated. Excellent role modelling right there. At the top of the Colosseum cliff overlooking the city, Big E.T. knew when to produce the iconic and cinematic moment. Someone give her a pay rise. In the city itself, the Atrociraptor pack had inducted a new unorthodox member, Dagger the Suchomimus. In their favourite back garden, the mismatched pack ate from a meat feeder together. Rory was continuing to make the Colosseum for her children, Little Jaw and Big Jaw, by taking down some more Nasutoceratops, and even Nokia was getting in on the act and joined in on the massacre. She squared up to one of the prehistoric bulls and effortlessly took it down, proving that she has the ability and the power to be a menace. She is just too lazy to show it. At the base of the Colosseum, Big E.T. found some dinosaurs that she wasn't a fan of, and she wasn't afraid to shout at them to let them know that. Big E.T. returned to the Colosseum, unaware though that a threat was waiting for her. One of the Giganotosaurus parents didn't like how close she was getting to his children and charged and attacked. catching Big E.T. unaware. A battle of the Titans was now underway as Big E.T. struck back before both theropods lunged at the same time. Big E.T. walked away while the Giga roared threateningly, standing over its two children. Big E.T. had picked up a sprain during the ordeal and went over to the meat feeder, needing the nutrition to help with the healing process. Big and Little Jaw were being taught well, obediently sticking by their parents wherever they were to keep away from the threats nearby. One of these threats is Jalapeno, who squared up against Tyson before deciding that the fight wasn't worth it. Instead, Jalapeno turned to domestic violence against Nokia, biting at her midriff. Nokia, of course, wasn't going to stand for this and bit back at her partner. Both then charged at the same time, and Nokia came off slightly worse and ran away from her supposed partner. Perhaps she didn't want a partner in the first place. The Gigas watched this domestic violence from afar and weren't afraid to let Jalapeno know of their disapproval of their actions. Big E.T. though hadn't learned a lesson from last time and once more stepped too close to the Giganotosaurus children. Rory this time was there to intercept her and attacked. This turned out to be a fatal mistake from the Rex as Rory grabbed her by the snout before knocking her over and grabbing her on the neck. Rory then clamped her teeth down Big E.T.'s neck, ending the Rex's life. It has to be said that neither Big or Little E.T. set a strong mark on this ecosystem, remaining in the Colosseum for most of the run, and when they did leave, they were reduced to scavenging. Overall, they can be viewed as a disappointment, as the Tyrannosaurus Rex was now once more extinct. There was another fight though going on in the Colosseum, albeit on a much smaller scale. And the Pseudoceratops were fighting to determine a new leader, locking horns and shoving each other to the ground. But that fight was interrupted as Tyson and Nokia squared up to one another. And this fight was as brief as Nokia's contribution to the ecosystem, as Tyson easily took her down, performing the same move that Rory did on Big E.T. The Giga parents showed they were willing to do anything to keep their children safe. Jalapeno was now left alone, and perhaps he regrets fighting with his partner instead of bonding with her. After constant violence throughout the day, the Colosseum now had a period of peace. Tyson paid no attention to the nearby juvenile Nasutos, but the aftermath was everywhere to see. Jalapeno waded through the water, trying to move on, while Hot Wing continued to do nothing at all. But this calm will not last for long. As night hit Malta, the Atrociraptors decided to fight for dominance, with the loser running away in shame. Despite not knowing his partner very well, Jalapeno still wanted revenge against Tyson, and approached a South American carnivore with rage in his soul. Unfortunately, Tyson bit first, before Jalapeno could get his spicy bite back. After a hard-hitting body slam, it was Jalapeno who came off worse, and the Spinosaur ran off, having failed in its mission. But that night, disaster struck in the city. The Malta Genetics Lab was no longer being maintained, and something had managed to break free. This genetic experiment was never meant to see the light of day or walk across the city streets. This is the Scorpius Rex, which the scientists have given the name Splinter. We can only guess at what traits the scientists gave to this thing and what effect it will have on the rest of the ecosystem. It seemed that the other animals in these lands could already sense Splinter's presence. The usually peaceful Hot Wing resorted to violence against this much smaller Pteranodon, and the Atrociraptors were on edge, while Hot Wing flew itself as far away from the city as possible. But the first unlucky soul to encounter Splinter was Dagger, the Suchomimus. Dagger had killed a similarly sized beast in Toro earlier in the ecosystem, but stood no chance against this monstrosity. Dagger fell to a devastating neck bite, and the Scorpius Rex feasted on the Piscivore's body. And something tells us that this is just the beginning. At least all is normal in the Colosseum for now, as Tyson continued to kill anything that got near Big or Little Jaw, and they continued to follow their father without question. In the city, Splinter was acting as an unhinged, as one would expect from an unfinished genetic experiment. One moment it was prowling through the streets, the next it was running in circles to flee from a single Atrociraptor. When it did eventually get its bearings, it screamed at the lone raptor, and despite the most hilarious mismatch in size, it was actually Splinter who ran away, terrified from the much smaller raptor. A few of the other Atrociraptors had now decided to leave the city, and made their way towards new pastures, the Colosseum. And it wasn't long before they began to continue their usual carnage, up there as they attacked Little Jaw. Rory and Tyson were obviously furious. Fortunately for the juveniles, the raptors turned their attention to Tyson, jumping on his face and clawing at him. They did manage to topple the Giga over, but Tyson was tough and managed to get back up. The raptors though still didn't give up and pounced once more. Tyson did continue to throw them off, even though the raptors were refusing to give up. In this third round, Tyson managed to throw off the vermin with so much force that the landing managed to kill them both. The remaining raptor was chased out the Colosseum by Rory, and Little Jaw was reunited at its father's side, safe once more. It wasn't all death and destruction in the ecosystem though, as Judy, Jory and Patrick were living a wonderful, peaceful and fun-loving life down in the Big Valley. The Gigas on the other hand though, were in a constant cycle of violence. The surviving Atrociraptor had returned, this time with a friend, and they were keen on revenge against Tyson. The two of them charged and clamped themselves onto Tyson's massive frame. With one of the baby Gigas watching, Tyson managed to throw off the raptors into the lake. Despite what looked like a very painful landing, the raptor got back up and charged once more. While this was happening, Jalapeno had a problem with Rory and was not afraid to voice it. Tyson managed to throw the raptors off once more and killed one of them, but Jalapeno engaged with Rory. Despite Jalapeno starting the fight, it was Rory who asserted herself and struck first. The Spino struck back before both being attacked at the same time, and in the end Jalapeno walked off, bloody and wounded. While that was still happening, the survivor Atrociraptor went back to chasing the young Gigas, but Tyson put himself between his child and the vermin. Tyson shouted at the raptor once more, giving it a last chance to clear off and leave his children alone. The Atrociraptor decided to oblige and retreated. After having a front row seat to all of that action, this Pteranodon decided to do the smart thing and fly away before it gave the Gigas a chance to kill it too. Down in the city, the Atrociraptors were hatching a new plan, and this one was their most ambitious to date. They sprinted down the streets, not stopping until they found their target, Judy, the Patigo Titan. They all jumped on, gnawing at the near endless amounts of meat and flesh that the sauropod had. Even when they lost grip, they just jumped back on and went for more. Eventually they tried, and the height of their fall was too much for them to bear, as all three of them died in their plan. Judy, for her part, I don't even think noticed the attack was happening. While all this was going on, we were spectating this. Jalapeno had attempted to fight Tyson in the Colosseum, and unsurprisingly had lost. Whether it was a close fight or easy pickings for Tyson will remain a mystery, but I think we can probably bet on the easy pickings. But what is known is that the Spinosaurs are now once more extinct from Malta, and they didn't really have too much of an impact on these lands. But what it also meant is that the Giganotosaurus had the Colosseum all to themselves pretty much, as Hotwing or the Nasutoceratops were not going to be causing them too much harm. The only threats left now were the Atrociraptors, who were still watching, and of course Splinter, who was chased away by Tyson. Splinter, easily distracted, quickly changed her target to attacking baby Atrociraptors. Just as it looked she had killed off this helpless baby, the raptor suddenly matured into adulthood. Absolutely terrified of what she had just witnessed, Splinter bolted. Rory, who was low on health from the whole ordeal of the last 10 days, took this time of peace to drink and spend some valuable time with Tyson, socialising together before she was allowed to rest and heal. Down in the Big Valley, Splinter was always on the move and had changed her target once more, this time fancying a large feast in Jory the Patigo Titan. While Splinter was unsuccessful in her hunt, she did have a secret weapon. Her bite was venomous. All she now had to do was wait for the poison to take hold of her prey. Tyson went down to the outskirts of the city to warn the raptors to stay away. But will these raptors actually listen, or will they try and perform one more stealthy heist? One creature who cannot be described as stealthy is Splinter, who is now taking on a Stegosaurus. First she swiped at the Stego with her tail, stinging the Stegosaur with her poison quills, inflecting the bloodstream of the herbivore. After this, Splinter bit twice at the Stegosaur's head, taking the armoured beast down. It was a flawless kill by Splinter, who finally seemed to be finding her feet in these lands. The looming threat of the Atrociraptor pack was just too much for Tyson, who charged down to take initiative and get rid of the problem once and for all. One by one, the raptors pounced at him, but he threw them off with ease. When they attacked in pairs, he continued to violently get rid of them. The raptors attacked a third time, and this time Tyson dispatched of them, fully killing the two Atrociraptors. Once this brief and easy fight was over, Tyson rested, basking in his victory. Splinter went in once more at Jory, and Jory did still have the poison inside his bloodstream, but Splinter was not content with waiting. She believed that the sauropod would fall with one more attack, and she was right. Jory toppled over, and Splinter had a giant feast to herself, leaving Judy a widow and Patrick fatherless. Both Rory and Tyson continued to move from the Colosseum into the city to check for any more Atrociraptors. They searched through every street, and Big Jaw followed them, but they continued to find nothing. Once upon a time in Malta, these raptors were on every corner, but thanks to Tyson, Rory and Judy, they are now few and far between. But speaking of Judy, she had taken a tragic turn for the worse. Splinter had attacked her and inflicted poison into her, and now all she could do was rest and hope that the body rids itself of the poison before too late, or else Patrick would become an orphan. Panthea, the oldest living Atrociraptor, led one final charge against the Giganotosaurs. They picked Rory to attack, but ultimately their plan was poorly thought out. They only attacked one at a time, allowing Rory to easily throw them off onto the hard surfaces of the city. Once the two adults were finally dispatched of, Rory turned her attention to kicking the babies. This particular juvenile seemed to forget that it was violently attacked and began to play with its tail right under the nose of an angry Rory. Pretty impressive stuff. But the Giganotosaurs had done their job, as the Atrociraptor infestation had been mostly cleared out. But there was still one more monster that needed to be taken out: Splinter. The Scorpius once more went for duty, and this time the behemoth sauropod fell. Patrick was now panicking and parentless, and overall, things were not looking good for him. The Giganotosaurus family continued to prowl the streets, looking for any threats to their children, but they had no idea just how close danger was lurking in the big valley, as Splinter left her feast to follow the sound of the Giganotosaur roars. There was a double whammy in the streets, as an Atrociraptor charged in and attacked one, while Splinter went for the other one. Rory was outraged and immediately went to fight Splinter. Splinter struck first with her tail, which wasn't good as Rory was now poisoned. Rory still had the strength to fight back, but could not block yet another tail swipe. Rory bit again, but ultimately had to walk away from the battle, leaving Tyson with the children. But tragically, there would only be one child left, as Big Jaw was hunted down by one of the few remaining Atrociraptors just days before it was fully grown. Little Jaw, who had just fully matured itself, was shell-shocked and could do nothing but stand in horror, looking down at its sibling's body. Another dinosaur who had fully matured was Patrick. Despite being parentless for the last few days, he had now developed into one big, meaty boy. Not only was Rory suffering from Splinter's poison, he had also suffered a concussion during that fight. Low on health, concussed and poisoned, her chances of survival were slim. All she could do was rest, while Tyson watched over. Splinter herself looked quite bloody and worse for wear following that fight. She went in once more to try and finish the kill on Rory, but Tyson managed to deter her from landing any blows. Likewise, as an Atrociraptor walked past, they didn't dare to make a move. But sadly, Rory didn't make it. Surrounded by her loved one, she succumbed to Splinter's poison. She had been a hero all her life, doing everything she could to protect her children, and ultimately, she had put her life on the line to prevent Splinter from getting to Little Jaw. Rest in peace, Rory, a true legend of these lands. Splinter herself was now suffering from a major fracture, and it was unknown as to whether it would survive long enough for it to heal. Tyson was now furious though. Within a day, he had lost both his partner and one of his children, and was taking his anger out. This baby Atrociraptor was unlucky enough to be in his presence, and Tyson trampled the youngster with all of his wrath. He wasn't done there though, as 3 more Atrociraptors were in the area, 1 adult and 2 juveniles. And Tyson targeted the smallest first, kicking it halfway across Malta. Fortunately for it, the baby somehow survived. But Tyson would never be truly happy until he got revenge. But fortunately, he didn't have to wait long for that opportunity. It was Splinter herself that called for a fight, and Tyson did not hesitate to accept. The two met halfway to fight, and Tyson acted quickly, getting that first important bite in. Tyson knew that the Scorpius was there for the taking, and Tyson would take his chance. As the rain started trickling down on day 100, Tyson grabbed Splinter by the skull and twisted, before clenching the hybrid's neck and forcing it to the ground, then ending this abomination's life with a simple but effective neck bite. Tyson had gotten his revenge, and Malta was finally free of scientific monstrosities that should never have existed, let alone been allowed to escape from its lab. In the end, the Giganotosaurs, the final, largest and meanest apex predators, were the heroes of the ecosystem. Not only vanquishing the Scorpius Rex, but vastly diminishing the Atrociraptor population also. Tyson basked in his victory. He may have lost almost everyone he cared about, but he could now finally rest and spend valuable time with his young. As we hit day 100, with the raptor population now under control, life in the ecosystem began to flourish once more. Even life thought long to be extinct found their way back to Malta. The ankylosaurs returned to graze in the meadows, the ornithomimises flocked, and the baryonyxes found their home by the lakes. Newborn life once more found a way, and the Atrociraptors were still given some privileges, such as hunting prehistoric ostriches. Patrick was given a hard life and was being hunted, combat was still plentiful, but after all, that is nature. It appeared in the form of the Giganotosauruses. Life had once more found a way to balance itself. Thank you all so much for watching my latest 100 Days Ecosystem video. If you have enjoyed, make sure to leave a like on the video. And if you aren't subscribed, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another Rampy video. Now you are done with this video though, why not watch the video that YouTube have posted on your screen? They think you will love it. Thanks so much for watching guys, and I will see you all in the next one.